Good morning. My name is Rashida Lopez Morgan, and I'm with Education First. We're a national policy and strategy education firm, and we do a lot of work with state education agencies, nonprofits, foundations, and certainly districts and charters. In my work, I get the opportunity to work with a lot of leaders, SEA leaders, state education agency leaders, district and charter leaders, and certainly with school leaders. So I'm excited to talk with you this morning about what it looks like to reset school culture and collaboration and community in the face of responding to COVID-19. So for the next few minutes, that's how I'll plan to spend my time with you, and we'll continue the discussion that Matt started earlier this morning. So here we go. As Matt shared, culture and collaboration, they're critical for creating conditions for high quality personalized learning. As you know, the relationships between students, teachers, and school leaders, they're supported by the routines, the capacities, and structures that are in place. Matt talked a little bit about these, things like trust, solving problems together, mutual accountability and support, physical and emotional safety, autonomy to innovate, a common sense of school mission, and time to teach and learn are critical and key components for creating conditions for high quality personalized learning. So Matt focused on structures. For my time with you, I'm going to focus on the routines and capacities needed to strengthen relationships and operate with higher levels of collaboration. Education First created the collaboration continuum, which is part of it was created and relayed as part of the Coherence Lab Fellowship, an initiative that's co-led by the Aspen Institute, CCSSO, and Education First. And it focuses on bringing together state, district, and school leaders to support coherent policy to practice experience for teachers and principals. It really describes where teams and organizations can fall or often fall on a continuum that characterizes collaboration by capacities and routines. The characteristics focus on features such as information sharing, decision-making, communication, and transparency. And it's grounded in research our team conducted about the conditions under which collaborative teams thrive. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes sharing the characteristics of these teams in the different stages on the continuum. And as I share, I'll ask you to think about how teams operate in your building and consider which characteristics most often apply to how teams operate. Teams in the compete stage and the folks who are on those teams often operate as if they're competing for secure and limited resources. So they'll operate with low levels of trust, meaning they don't quite trust each other, and they view their work as conflicting and distinct, not interdependent or depending on each other. There are low levels of trust, as I said before, and then the teams and individuals, because of that low level of trust, feel like they need to guard information rather than sharing it. They don't have regular routines in place to share information or to work together. And hierarchical and traditional reporting relationship structures, those are going to be the primary mechanisms within which information is shared. Operating this way can result in disjointed, conflicting, and sometimes incorrect information that is shared both internally and externally. Teams that coexist and the individuals on those teams, so teams that are operating in the coexist stage, they're operating in independent silos, even though the culture and this approach is well-meaning. Teams and individuals don't quite compete, but they're not going to move out of their lane. They're going to stay in their lane. They're going to stay focused on staying in their lane. There's no incentive to build trust and partnership, and there's no focus on mutual beneficial relationships. So team members aren't seeking out opportunities to identify and cultivate mutually beneficial relationships. And when they do, they may face obstacles since everybody's trying to stay in their lane. Teams that operate this way, they likely set their goals in isolation and without awareness of what's happening on other teams. Decision-making can vary based on the individual leadership style, and each department or each team has its own unique routines for exchanging information and working together. So rather than having a shared approach across all teams. While information is easily shared throughout the organization, it's not shared across teams. Since external communication is likely developed and shared directly with audiences without any clarity on what other teams are doing, it may conflict and be contradictory. So in a school community, this might look like when a teacher conveys a message to her students about something that's happening in the school, but the message students and parents receive from administration is different. The next stage in the continuum is the communicate stage. Teams in the communicate stage and individuals on those teams regularly exchange information and are focused on mutual benefits. There's a high level of motivation to work together on the teams, although there may not be the routines in place to work together. Information is transparently provided, but how that information is used is unclear. Connection points between information and decisions are not necessarily made. And finally, planning processes do not consider what is needed for coordination and collaboration. So as an example of this, it might be a grade level teams coming together to plan in their individual teams, but only communicating their goals to other grade levels rather than participating in any vertical planning in which grade level teams get to interact with each other and even contribute to, or at a minimum, understand the goals that teams have set. One other feature or characteristic of teams in the communication stage is that external communications may have overlapping or conflicting messages, even still, since the structures that need to be in place to regularly exchange information, the routines that are in place, they're not always there. Teams in the coordinate stage create a shared vision that is well understood by the majority of the staff. So these teams, they may still operate in silos a little, but there are work groups in place to bring them together based on shared interests and goals. Efforts to coordinate are intentionally designed to lead to greater outcomes, but they're not always systematically implemented across the organization. Trust and the desire to coordinate exist, so that is key. Individuals are willing to learn from each other and make corrections to spur improvement. And shared information is processed, and there are routines for ongoing coordination, which is also key. Teams regularly share information, and decisions made by leaders are transparently shared with staff. An example of this might be a principal who consistently brings the staff together, teachers together for planning and for their school-wide meetings, and he or she is consistently sharing key decisions and outcomes from staff meetings with teachers so that they can effectively coordinate with each other. Finally, external communications aren't conflicting because they are coordinated, because the systems are in place for that to happen. Finally, the final stage in the continuum is the collaborate stage. And in this stage, teams, they have a shared vision with initiatives that align to that shared vision. Teams identify critical interdependencies and they execute against shared priorities and ownership. Planning maximizes opportunity for impact within and across the team. Leadership frequently highlights exemplars of collaboration from within the organization at all levels. Leaders are champions and committed to creating enabling conditions to support collaboration vertically and horizontally. Support for collaboration is evident from top down. There's a deep commitment to continuous improvement, and there are opportunities for shared learning and reflection. So an example of this is a school where a principal has engaged all teachers and staff in identifying and setting academic goals, and then communicates those academic goals regularly throughout the year, and then has meetings and routines in place that are all about understanding and supporting those academic goals and working together across grade level teams to meet those academic goals. And then external communications in these instances, they're carefully crafted and shared among a number of vehicles. So that might look like a principal who has a newsletter and who has a way to communicate key messages via phone, and also has paper, a way to communicate via paper. We're going to take a moment here in a second in small groups to talk a little bit about the collaboration continuum and how it comes to life in your buildings. But before we do, I want to share a final reflection about the role listening plays in building strong culture, collaboration, and community. In his TED Talk, Ernesto Cirioli talks about the paternalistic approach that is often taken to help communities, which can result in more damage than good. So when folks come into a community and they assume they know what the problem is, and even do what they think is due diligence to understand what the problem is, and then move forward with a solution, often they do more damage than good. Instead, he says he had to do something very different to truly help when he was in this situation, and that was shut up and listen. So his TED Talk has really good insights into his story, his experience, and his lessons about what it looks like to shut up and listen, and we're sending that in the materials that you have. As you're returning to your buildings, a big part of your jobs will be to listen to your colleagues, students, and families to truly be able to help them. So in the materials, I've included resources for something you can use to do that which is called empathy interviews. In the Coherence Lab Fellowship, we discuss the important role empathy plays in listening to understand. It is, in fact, at the center. Empathy interviews are a way to help you listen and hear from others in a way that is relational instead of transactional. When you're listening to really understand experiences and what a problem is from that point of view, and not leading with your own opinion or your own focus, quite frankly, on identifying a solution, but rather really trying to understand the problem better. I've included some guidelines in the resources for how to conduct an empathy interview, but would encourage you to try to conduct empathy interviews with your team, with community members, and with your students. It will be some of the most important data you collect as you prioritize your plans when school reopens. It will also be one way to attend to the social and emotional needs of your colleagues and your community, since feeling heard and seen goes such a long way with one's social and emotional health. So as we turn to begin our discussion, and here are the discussion questions, I just want to remind you to remember that your focus on high quality personalization and instruction undergirds your focus on collaboration and culture. Everything that you're doing and you're collaborating about and your culture should be focused on this high quality personalized instruction for your students. Having the right structures, routines, and capacities to support the relationship between students and families, teachers and school leaders is key, even as logistics of schooling changes. Because even as logistics change, best practices remain best practices. So I encourage you to remain focused on adapting best practices to your context. So I hope the collaboration continuum was helpful and gave you some things to think about, a way to think about what collaboration can look like in your building. If there's anything that I can do or we can do from Education First to support you with your work, please don't hesitate to reach out, and invite you to now turn in your small groups to discuss these questions that are focused on really reflecting on the collaboration continuum and what could apply in your context, as well as the stage of the collaboration continuum that describes how teams operate, and then finally thinking about shifts you could make in your building to more effectively coordinate or collaborate. Thank you.